Well, while I wait for my 5 hour and 20-minute video to finish compiling, it's taking 28 hours to compile. It's a very long video. And it's to finish up my work with, let's see, where is it? With this latest gizmo that I've been working on. The what I thought was going to be a power supply I called it my heaviside correction to the Ferrante effect, in which I add a transformer so that I don't just have lumped inductors. I actually have an iron core pair of coils. And try as I might, I couldn't get it to rotate properly, or the balance of amps to volts was really miserable, because I did the math, and the power level is huge. You know, it's just what Jim Murray says, a lightly loaded shorted generator, which is the same thing as a lightly loaded shorted motor. It's well known in the industry, whoever makes motors and generators will always, and he stressed always, will produce an over unity, but that's only when it's lightly loaded. Try to load the thing and it kills the over unity. So there's no way this thing is going to rotate anytime soon. So I thought, okay, it's got to be a power supply for a UFO. But then all we have to bank on, so to speak, is William Lyne. And yet now we have somebody else. Now, I love this movie. I watch it a lot. I watch it so much so, I just watched it tonight. I have a copy I bought from the local library bookstore sales. They're trying to getting rid of VHS tapes that people donate to them. And I've just been amassing a collection, you know. I don't anymore, but I did spend some time, and this was one of them. And I never saw this movie. I wasn't going to the movie theaters or something in 1985. I don't know. I just didn't see it. Interestingly enough, he posted this 3 months ago, and wouldn't you know it, I've been watching this movie practically religiously, because when I was 5 years old, that's what I dreamed I would do one day. I would figure out how to, with the help of a friend, I would build a UFO craft, a levitation device. And, you know, I dreamt I was flying just like Ethan Hawke dreams that he flies in this movie, in his dreams. And then the three of these buddies make this craft with the help of aliens. Now, of course, we all know who aliens are. They're extraterrestrials, are merely the Germans who lost the war. Well, excuse me, they didn't lose the war. They lost their country. They got to hold on to their technology and their edge over both Russia and the United States. Let's see. Maybe I should find some other way to open this file. I'll read it to you. I posted it on somebody's YouTube video. Let's see, what can I open this with? I can open it with this. And I wanted to share with them my perspective on the situation, which is hardly the way it is that they look at it. They think aliens exist and are true. So let's see, get the zoom up, fit the width. Okay, extraterrestrials are expatriate Germans who lost their country, but not World War II. They won hands down with all of the cutting-edge technology, which they stole outright from Nikola Tesla for over half a century. This is all William Lyne stuff in Pentagon Aliens. William Lyne points out in his books, one of which is Pentagon Aliens, that Werner von Braun researched in New Mexico on technology stolen from Tesla, his special generator, which the Germans incorporated into some of their electro-U-Boats, giving them unlimited range, the neutron bomb, which Rammel tested in the Libyan desert, and of course UFO technology, which Tesla invented its proof of concept while he was still in college. Tesla built and flew a potbelly stove large enough for himself to fit into around the skyline of New York City. in the mid to late 1890s, and I suspect he applied this neutralization of inertia in his 1897 Pierce-era electric vehicle conversion long before Peter Savo was born. All right? And now, River Phoenix in the movie Explorers calls it let me see if I can pronounce this, Trachetslossigkeit. Trachetslossigkeit, which means no inertia. And I looked for that, and I found that somebody actually mentioned that movie and that phrase. I had no idea that somebody else thinks the same way I do, and they already thought about it. In the kids' movie Explorers, the characters made a point of explaining how their new invention created a cavity in which the contents had no inertia. After River Phoenix takes the first test flight, Hawk, what was it like? Phoenix, I couldn't feel myself speed up or slow down. Phoenix, do you know what this means? Do you realize what it means? Hawk, no. Phoenix, Trachetslossigkeit, that's German for no inertia. Odd to make a point of saying that when inside the field there was no mass and no inertia. This is a kid's movie. Why not just say, wow, we can fly around really fast? Also odd that his characters described it in German. Well, his father and his whole family was German. It was a setup. Even in the, Cromwell, James Cromwell, Babe, the movie Babe, the little piggy. He plays River Phoenix's father. And he's always looking for the bug bomb. It's so funny. And they got a slew of kids in that house. Anyway, they're both inventors, both River and his father. Anyway, so he describes it in German because they're German, right? Even as a kid watching this in 1985, it felt like something more was going on with this silly kids sci-fi movie. I felt like disclosure. And here's this patent, which came out just last year. U.S. patent 10,144,532 filed by the U.S. Navy started making the rounds. In it, they describe a method where local polarization of the vacuum energy state was achieved through high-energy electromagnetic field generator. The patent claims this will create a reduction of inertial mass and hints at repulsive gravity. In the summary, it is a feature of the present invention of provide a craft using an inertial mass reduction device that can travel at extreme speeds. These are interesting times, friends. Now, I went and I looked up the patent, and I downloaded it, and here it is. It was April 28th, 2016, actually 3 years ago. And I read through it, and then I took a walk this evening after watching the River Phoenix movie, and I figured out how the thing works. This is the graphic here. They have a cavity between an inner wall and the outer wall, and they bounce microwaves around inside the cavity. And by directing where they bounce it, they determine which way this thing is going to move. But that doesn't interest me. What interests me is the principle behind the thing. What are they exciting inside this cavity? They're exciting two things happening simultaneously. Mechanical vibration and electromagnetic frequency. Now, there's very interesting ties to at least two technologies we know exists, and a few that I want to speculate on, because I think I've figured out how levitation works. It's not the way William Lyne says it works. Because let's start with the Twin Towers, the 9/11. Now, according to Judy Woods, I believe her name is, she wrote a book, it's on Amazon, called Where Did the Towers Go? And it's her contention, she's a forensic scientist, that they dustified. They just turned into dust, and there was a light wind that morning, a light breeze, and it just blew it away. That's why there's no debris field to speak of. There should be a huge mound of debris underneath where the tower fell into, and it didn't. It turned to dust and blew away. There was very little debris. The only piece of evidence, for the most part, that we see in the debris field in movies of what happened is the aerial, the microwave antenna that sat on the top of the building. The first tower, I believe it was the first or the second, I forget which one that went down, that had the aerial. Be that as it may, and there was descriptions of people blowing up as they leaped out to their deaths. Why would they leap out of the building and why would their bodies blow up and never hit the ground intact? is because the building was being subjected to microwave radiation. They were being cooked alive, and that's why they went nuts and thought they'd be better off if they jumped. But little did they know, all they did was intensify themselves traveling through the field at a rapid rate, that it actually intensified the energy that their body accumulated on the way down, and that's when they blew up. Well, eventually the building blew up, but not right away. An earlier theory put out by a group of kids who were this one guy who was a waiter in a local restaurant, and he used his tips to fund the making of the movie, and so they titled it Loose Change, and then the sequel to Loose Change. Their contention is that there was a controlled demolition going on, and that's why you see it blow up floor by floor as we proceed downwards to create a pancake effect in which the whole thing just pushes down on itself and collapses. Well, I think both theories are correct, and here's why. Because if it was merely a detonation, we'd have a debris field, but we don't have a debris field. Now, Judy Woods claims that it was the Hutchison effect. It was a combination of two electromagnetic waves interfering in an electrostatic field, and that's what brought it down, but I don't think so. I think what happens is we have to understand how anti-gravity levitation UFOs work, and then understand that it's a variation, it's a controlled event, and if we do the same thing but don't control orientation of direction to the various forces involved, which I'll get to in a minute, what we have basically is an explosion. And that's what happened at 9/11. They used the technique for levitating UFOs on the building, but geometrically speaking without any orientation, and that's why everything went which way and blew away with the wind. Instead of levitating, instead of getting the building to hover, it fell to pieces into very fine dust, including the bodies of the people. They blew up. Now, we get to segue into Tesla's special generator. Now, William Lyne and Thomas Comerford Martin, well, via William Lyne, we find out from Thomas Comerford Martin that the Tesla special generator that he demonstrated to a group of engineers, including Thomas, in 1893, 2 years before his lab fire in 1895, destroyed everything. He never got a chance to patent his special generator, and he had 50 miles of winding on that thing. He wasn't about to build another one. He just moved on to other things. Be that as it may, the thing was a reciprocating motor, a reciprocating generator, a reciprocating generator, in which it only had to reciprocate 1/16 of an inch at 80 cycles per second to generate an alternating current and become a generator. And it was run on compressed air stored in liquefied air tanks, and that was the patent that was stolen from him, and then they covered up the theft with a fire. The Germans were stealing from him left and right for half a century. And then Carl Linde of Germany, Linde, patented this liquefaction of air almost immediately, after the fire. So it was pretty obvious what happened. It was a cover-up, arson to cover up the theft. But the special generator is interesting. Tesla was into two things simultaneously. One of his friends was Mark Twain. And he had Mark Twain visit him one day, and he had him stand on a platform, and the platform was connected to a mechanical vibrator. And the thing started vibrating, and Mark Twain said, "Oh my God, this feels great." And Tesla warned him, "You better not stand on it too long." "Oh my God, this is great." And then finally he had this terrified look on his face, Mark, not Nikola. And he said to Nikola, "Where's the bathroom?" Because he had a terrible case of diarrhea, the runs, because he stood on it. He didn't take Nikola's advice and get off. Well, Nikola did other experiments, we are told by various sources, in which he hooked up this mechanical vibrator to one of the posts, the supporting beams of the building that went through his lab. He was up on some multi-floor of the building, and it shook the building so bad it got into resonance with the building. The building has a resonant frequency, and it changed its pitch until it hit the resonant frequency, and then it felt like an earthquake, not only in the building, but in the city, in the neighborhood surrounding the building. And the police came and said, "Nikola, What are you doing today, this time, Come on, put a stop to it. So, why would Nikola get into mechanical engineering experiments along with his electrodynamic experiments? We're told it's because there's so much similarity between the two fields, because what happens on the macroscopic level of mechanical vibrations is directly related to the microscopic or atomic movements that creates electrodynamics. And there's actually a sutra of Yoga Potentially that describes this, that describes levitation in this very context. But they're very terse about it, so you have to interpret it. The expression, or part of the expression, part of the sutra that has to do with the technique for levitating the human body, describes an expression that's expressed elsewhere a little less tersely in the Vedas. And so I'll give you that less terse expression first. As is the body, namely the human body, so is the cosmic body. I don't know in Sanskrit, I just told you the English. And then now the terse expression in Yoga Potentially is relationship between the body and space. Well, space is the cosmic body. And of course the body is our personal body. What is the relationship? They're one and the same. Whatever functions in one, it operates just as well in the other, even though the scale is different. Now, this is why mechanical engineering is equivalent to electrodynamics, because at the atomic level, it's no different than mechanical engineering. In other words, at the macroscopic level of mechanical engineering, it's no different than electrodynamics. They are one and the same. The only difference is a difference of scale. But there's more. That's the reason we're told that Tesla got into both, but that's not the reason. The reason is, in order to levitate something, you have to do what this patent tells you to do. You have to vibrate the cavity between the inner and outer wall, and you have to generate, and you have to vibrate it with a high frequency, and you have to generate a high frequency. In this case, he claims microwave frequency, electromagnetic waves. You have to do both. And this is what brought down the Twin Towers in New York City, because they were vibrated by the controlled demolition, the detonation, only after they had cooked the building for a considerable length of time to get all the atoms at the atomic level vibrating electromagnetically, or I should say, electromagnetically, using microwave radiation. And the aerial at the roof was one dipole, and the other dipole was the Earth. And that's why there was a tunnel, or a tube, of microwave radiation completely surrounding the building, the entire vertical length of the building, top to bottom. And that's why when people leaped out of the building's windows and traveled through the tube lengthwise, they compressed that energy inside themselves enough to blow themselves up before the building blew up, because the microwave was enough because of their compression. They were mechanically traveling through the field of microwave radiation, and that was the combination necessary to blow themselves up, because there was no orientation to the excitation, the dual excitation of their body, and so their molecules of their body just went every which way but loose. Any direction other than the same direction. They went in multiple different directions, and that's what an explosion is. While levitation is a controlled explosion in which you get things to vibrate in the same direction, and they hover or they move right angle turn at 90,000 miles an hour or 4,000, whatever it is. That's the only difference between levitation and an explosion. So this is why Tesla considered both, because he realized what levitation was. I don't know how he learned about it. According to William Lyne, he learned about it while he was still a college boy. Before he even got out of college, he already knew the concept behind it. It must have been, he was sitting in class and it just came to him, because the guy was gifted, right? So things just came to him. He was born with this stuff. All he had to do was yank it out of his soul. Evoked by circumstances such as going to school. I can imagine it. It happens to anybody, You never know when it's going to hit you, the creative impulse. It just happens, The planets are in the right alignment. Who knows, It just happens. So he figured it out before he even left school, the concept behind it, and then he had to wait until he got the opportunity to put it into effect. And he put it in multiple ways. And the Pierce Arrow demonstration of 1897, that was only a private demonstration. There was no Peter Savo. He did it for his own satisfaction, to himself, by himself, for himself, applying the levitational principles to a motor design, which I'll get to in a minute, that I speculate how to convert UFO technology into a motor design that will actually rotate a motor and propel a car forward without levitating the car, without neutralizing the car's inertia, as I suspected would have to be done. That doesn't have to be done at all. You merely levitate the components of the motor and move them forward, but forward to what? Tangential to a axle of orientation, an imaginary axle of orientation. This is why the Arthur Matthews story requires a hydraulic transmission system of Nikola Tesla's demonstration. Because if he didn't do that, the whole thing would break the transmission system because of a sudden, 90 or 4,000 mile per hour right angle turns. You try to accelerate a car using the principles of a UFO, and you're going to break the transmission axle in no time flat, in an instant. So he had to have a hydraulic transmission system to avoid breakage. In other words, the hydraulic system is already a non-solid object which is already broken into the molecules of water, however you want to interpret it. So let's just enlarge this. So we have an MP3 file. I also host it on my website, and I link to it in my book, but I haven't upgraded my book yet. So let's go down to the paragraph. Oh my God, this article is so amazing. It's got the most ramification, weird stuff in it. Here we go. So he talks about this car, 94 miles an hour in 1897, and it's said he used an alternating current motor which runs at the tremendous speed of 30,000 RPM, and it's reduced to 1800 by means of a fluid transmission. Also the invention of Tesla, namely his bladeless turbine and his valvular conduit to create a one-way flow, to convert something that alternates into a one-way directional flow. Because his valvular conduit, I have to say it slowly or else I trip up on the word, valvular, is basically a no-moving part one-way valve for the fluid to flow only in one direction. And then he gets into the battery, but the battery's doesn't amuse me. What amuses me is that what's hidden away in this story is that he figured out how to make a motor out of levitation. So let me back up first and make sure I've covered all the basic principles. No, I don't think so. Okay, so now it's time for the principles. How does levitation work? So I just explained to you how an uncontrolled combination of a mechanical vibration and electromagnetic radiation, both at high frequency, microwave frequency, will destroy a building, the tallest building in the world, and turn it into microfine dust, sufficiently small enough particles for the gentle breeze to just blow it away. All right? But now we have to consider, well, how do we change that into something that's organized so that we can have direction of movement and levitation and hovering? It's real simple. Tesla's special generator gives the clue. Tesla's special generator was a reciprocating engine, or a reciprocating generator. 1/16 of an inch, a shaft that reciprocated a 1/16 of an inch, and there was a piston in the middle that engaged the compressed air, or the compressed air engaged the piston, in such a way that the piston relationship to the air, the compressed air blowing through it, was that of the reed in a wind instrument, a reeded wind instrument, such as a clarinet or an oboe, in which you change the pressure and you cannot change the frequency, or pitch if you prefer, of the reciprocating reed or the reciprocating piston in his special generator. It non-varying. And Thomas Comerford Martin tells us that was very important to Tesla. Why? Because he was going to use it in combination with an electromagnetic frequency, and the two had a match. He couldn't create a beat frequency. That beat frequency now goes out the window. He had to have a unity of frequency between a mechanical vibration and an electromagnetic frequency. The two had to be in phase of the same frequency. And that means the mechanical, the most likely one to veer off target, could not afford to. And that's the only purpose behind this special generator. Yet he didn't give that to the Germans. Well, he did. He gave them the UFO technology, and half of it is his special generator. Okay? So a mechanical vibrator that you can tell it, or design it, I mean to say, to vibrate, reciprocatingly vibrate at a fixed rate and never vary. This is very crucial. He already invented it. Okay, so we know that in electrodynamic theory, the two components, namely the dielectric and magnetism, are at right angles to each other, namely the magnetic field and the electric field. And in this patent I was reading, very interestingly, they talk about the electrostatic field as being singular in nature, namely only the electric field, while the electromagnetism of the microwave radiation is dualistic. It has both the electrostatic component, the electric field, and the magnetic field of magnetism. This is a very important consideration of how he described that. Okay? So when we have mechanical vibration of a reciprocating nature, you know what we have? We have electrostatics in a macroscopic format. Okay? Electrostatics is microscopic, and reciprocating action of a piston is macroscopic, mechanical engineering. Same thing, only on a different scale. Think about it. When you have a voltage potential, two voltage potentials divided by empty space, namely the sun and the earth, and the sun is surrounded by a plasma, lit up, it's excited, highly excited, and then the earth's atmosphere is mildly excited. Why is it mildly excited? Well, we're told that electromagnetic radiation, known as light and other wavelengths, travel through empty space. Yeah, right. Nothing travels through empty space, but you don't need to. What happens is, let me see if I can remember my line of reasoning here. What you have at the microscopic level is reciprocating vibration, mechanical reciprocating vibration. And space, so-called empty space, is the dielectric. Now, what does Eric Dollard do when he shows us the difference between electromagnetic radiation that is a transverse wave versus longitudinal vibration, which is not? He works with Thomas Brown, and they hold a rope with a little slack in it, and he gives it a flick at right angles up and down to the direction of travel, and of course he creates a wave that travels down the length of the rope, but it takes time for it to travel. And then he pulls on the rope taut, and it would have been better had they replaced it with a wooden rod or a steel rod, but they didn't. And then he demonstrates that when you have this solid rod or tube or a taut rope and you pull on it, you immediately get results at the other end. It doesn't take any time to transfer the movement to the other side. The transference, or the time, the so-called speed of light, is really a time lag. It has nothing to do with speed because nothing travels. It has to do with the time lag involved for the electromagnetic component of electrodynamics to respond to an electrostatic cause. Meanwhile, the electromagnetics is the effect, and the time lag is the speed of light. So the sun, and there's another important point I haven't gotten to yet. When you have a large voltage potential at the sun, and a minuscule teensy-weensy one hardly existent at the Earth. What do they want to do? If we were to put a wire, or in the case of the atmosphere, if you have an ionic channel that precedes a lightning strike, you have the basis for current to travel between, let's say, the cloud mass and the Earth. Without that ionic channel forming, you won't get the lightning bolt to have a causeway to travel, and equalize the voltage charges between the Earth and the cloud. Well, the empty space is not giving a pathway, a conduit, for any energy to travel. Now, what happens when you have a buildup of pressure, especially at one end? Yeah, right, of course, by comparison to the other end, in this case the sun. What do you have? You have vibration, mechanical vibration, because it's potential energy. And it has nowhere to release itself, and so it just stays in one place and vibrates back and forth, back and forth, back and forth, but in random motion, unless you tell it to be longitudinal or linear along one dimension. It tends to be random. And if it gets sufficient enough, it explodes in all directions. But if we give it a pathway to release its voltage buildup, then we get that arcing or that lightning bolt. We get the current traveling between the two poles of the battery. And a solar flare is just that. It's a conduit, because some of the plasma of the sun gets ejected, and so it's able to form that solar flare along the conduit of that plasma. Otherwise, it's not going to escape. Let's face it, it stays where the plasma is and simply amasses all this voltage and vibrates like heck, because it's trying to break free and can't, because empty space is a dielectric. So we actually get mechanical vibration as a consequence to electrostatic buildup. The two are one and the same. It may be that one is the cause and the other is the effect, but it doesn't matter. If you compress a piezoelectric dielectric material such as quartz crystal, you get a voltage change. In no uncertain terms, that's how our digital watches operate, on a square wave, creating this sudden rise and sudden fall of a voltage, compressing and alternately relaxing a piece of piezoelectric crystal, creating the necessary vibration frequency to run our little digital watches. So the forces of vibration is merely another version of compression versus the alternation of compression, which is its opposite, relaxation. Buckminster Fuller talked about this because he was an engineer, and so he knew about, when you design the trusses for a bridge, you have to deal with the two opposite forces of compression and tension. Or did I say that right? Well, the opposite of compression. I forget the term he used. It might have been tension. To me, I think of tension as being compression, but whatever. Compression and the pushing and pulling, basically. But if you alternate push and pull, you get reciprocation along one direction, a linear direction, known as reciprocating movement. And that's what intelligent, coherent electrostatic is. That's what it amounts to. Meanwhile, electromagnetic is rotational. It gives us our motors, while the reciprocating action of electrostatics gives us alternating current. That's why it travels down a copper wire. You don't see it traveling down an iron wire. You see it traveling down a copper wire because it's electrostatic by its very nature. It reciprocates. Every half cycle of a 60-cycle AC cycle, it travels down one wire, and along that same wire, the next half cycle, it travels backwards. While the other side is doing the same thing, but in reverse phases of time. So alternation is actually an electrostatic phenomenon. And Eric Dollard points out there's a difference between the two. So this is what helped me distinguish between the two. And this is fundamentally how we define electrostatics versus magnetism. Magnetism is rotational. That's why the perpetual motion holder has to be a toroidal iron mass, while Alternating current is electrostatic in nature. It reciprocates. Now we understand what levitation is, because we perform mechanical reciprocating excitation at the same time that we perform electromagnetic rotation, but with this one caveat. The axis of rotation of that electromagnetic spin is the same orientation of the electrostatic reciprocation, or the mechanical, I should say, the mechanical reciprocation, so that they are at right angles to each other. The spin plane is at right angles. The spin plane of the electromagnetic frequency, such as microwave radiation, is at right angles to the electrostatic mechanic or electrostatically defined mechanical vibration of a mechanical physical object at the macroscopic level of its existence. Then we get levitation, probably along the lines of the reciprocation, and only in one direction, because I read elsewhere, it might have been in this patent, it's, you know, the right-hand rule? Well, it turns out that somebody did a gyroscope experiment and they couldn't figure out why they did the gyroscope experiment in a vacuum. They couldn't understand why the thing lost weight. You know, this was, you know, we all wonder, you know, if a gyroscope sits on a string or on the tip of your finger, did it also lose weight? Well, they did the experiment in a vacuum and they proved that it did lose weight, but only if they spun the gyroscope in a specific direction. The other way, it didn't work. It didn't lose weight. So it shows that even the spin has to be oriented a certain way with respect to the direction you wish to travel, let alone the reciprocating action has to be at right angles to the plane of the spin, the spinning electromagnetic wave. So this is the integration of the two forces of how you create levitational movement in one direction, which ignores gravity, it ignores inertia. It's not that it neutralizes it, it simply ignores it. Which begs the question, how did gravity get formed in the first place? Aha. Probably by the same action. The very force that creates levity creates gravity. Hey, how different can it be? Except it's pointed to the center of the Earth. That means there's something in the center, separated by a hollow space, that's creating a coherence, an intelligent coherence orchestration to all the molecules within the biosphere of the Earth. You know, the crust, the Earth, and the biomass on top of it, the air. All of it gets oriented inward to the center and wants to fall into the center, but doesn't. Why? Because the Earth spins. And we know what spinning does. It throws things off at a tangential arc. And that counterpoises. It creates a buoyance effect in which we have both gravity and levity, the levity, so to speak, of the gyrational force and the gravity that's intrinsic to the center of the Earth, and the two counterbalance each other so nicely that the crust of the Earth floats at its happy medium between the two extremes of those two forces. See how delicately balanced the Earth is? It's extremely delicately balanced. Slight modification to either of those two forces and the whole thing would crumble and fall apart in pieces and become another asteroid belt between Mars and Venus instead of between Mars and Jupiter. That's why I think what happened to that planet between Mars and Jupiter. A little human intervention of whoever was living on it, most likely, because it's usually always the humans that throw things out of balance. Anyway, Charlie Lutz loved to remind us that Mother Nature's always putting everything back into balance, and the human is always putting it out of balance. Only the human. Angels don't do that. And animals can't. At least to no great degree. They're not as powerful as angels. An angel would never do that. And the fallen angels, well, you know, they wreak a little havoc. Thank God it's only a little. Anyway, so you have it. Now you have... Now, so how does this apply to a motor? How did Tesla put this in a motor? Well, I just gave it to you. he put 4 quadrants. He divided up his motor into 4 quadrants, and he had a levitational device in each of those 4 quadrants to cause the thing to rotate. He didn't have to beam any microwaves forward, because I was thinking about that earlier in the day. My earlier idea that I posted on a video that I'm now compiling, so you won't get to see it until after you see this one, was the beaming of electrostatic waves forward in the forward direction to pull the craft along, because that's what William Lyne said. But I thought about it. What if you stood in front of a car that was outfitted with this device? It would be equivalent to being tased. And if you were standing barefoot in a puddle of water, grounded to the earth, you'd be electrocuted. Because that's what happens, When they tase you, it's on the presumption that you're not connected to the earth, because if you were, you'd be electrocuted. Instead, the assumption is you're insulated, wearing rubber-soled shoes, or sitting in your car on rubber tires, insulating you on the asphalt, double insulation, and so you get an uncomfortable tickle, but you don't get electrocuted, because there's no current flow. It's just voltage excitation of your physiology when they tase you. So I just imagined what would happen if Tesla did something like that and put it in his Pierce Arrow. It would be nightmare if somebody crossed the crosswalk in front of his car, They'd be tased, basically. And if they were walking barefoot in a puddle in the street, in the rain, they would have been electrocuted. So it didn't make sense. But this patent opened up my eyes, and I realized now what he did. He created a small effect, not a large scale. He didn't have to. He wasn't trying to neutralize the inertia of the body of the Pierce Arrow, the 4,000-pound Pierce Arrow. He didn't have to. All he had to do was neutralize the inertia of the motor itself, and then avoid breaking the transmission axle, uniting the motor with the wheels, because the motor would want to accelerate from 0 to God knows what. In the case of Arthur Matthews, 30,000 RPM, instantaneously. And that would have broken the transmission axle. So he had a fluid transmission so as not to break. And also to slow down, probably with baffles in the hydraulic conduit, to slow down the rotation of the fluid, set up by the rotating motor. But all he had to do was rotate the motor. And so he had 4 quadrants. It takes a minimum of 3, right? The Mazda engine. But Tesla was big on 4. Who's that guy? Steinmetz, who converted the Tesla system of AC, which was a 4-phase system, into the much more economical 3-phase system, and save a lot of money on copper wire. But it was a nightmare of mathematics to engineer the thing at 3 phases, because 4 phases is so easy. Everything's plus versus minus. In 3 phases, plus and minus go out the window. And so Eric Dollard had to advance the knowledge that Steinmetz had started, and others in between Eric and Steinmetz had contributed, such as Arthur Kennelly and whatnot. And what who. So Tesla set up a 4-quadrant motor in which he had 4 of these levitational devices set up, each on the 4 arms of the 4 axes of his cross. He had a cross, basically, to induce spin in the plane of the cross at right angles to the direction of travel, namely the forward direction travel of the car. So this is important, that the motor spins at right angles to the direction of travel, because now you have to have the shaft. This is the other reason for having a hydraulic transmission system. Not only would it have broken had he had it fixed, but he had to have the shaft of the motor reciprocate forwards and backwards along its shaft at the same frequency as the electromagnetic vibration he was using to spin it, which is 30,000 RPM. Divided by 60, that sounds like 500 hertz, doesn't it? Right. At 500 cycles per second, he had the whole thing running. So he had the axle of the motor reciprocating forwards and backwards at 500 cycles per second, precisely to match the rotation of the motor, which was rotating at 500 cycles per second. Okay? At a right angles to the reciprocating action of the axle of the motor. Now, was the motor actually rotating? Or was it simply the field, the electromagnetic field of the motor, that was rotating at 500 cycles per second? Because technically that would be the correct way to describe it. Could possibly be he had a toroidal electromagnet, and he had induced in there a rotational frequency of 30,000 RPM, equivalent to 30,000 RPM, which was actually 500 cycles per second. And then he had it vibrate along its axle, in other words, perpendicular to its spin plane at 500 cycles per second. That would have been easy for Tesla, hands down. He already knew how to do that. So it sounds like there were no moving parts in his motor. And that's why he was able to get it up to such a high frequency. But it says in this patent you have to have a higher frequency. You get more power gain that way. Boy, that's a lot of stuff, isn't it? Okay, so nothing rotated in the motor. There were no moving parts. Well, that's how UFOs work. There are no moving parts. Except it does vibrate. So there is a moving part, but it does not rotate. It vibrates along a linear axle, a unidimensional reciprocating line of movement. So there you go. That's the secret to Tesla's UFO technology. And we can actually apply it to a car to propel it forward. Because, well, you had to have some moving parts. That would have been the, oh, that's true. Yeah, no, you would have had to have some moving parts because you got to have the bladeless turbine rotate the water in the hydraulic transmission conduit, the valvular conduit. So something has to rotate. Well, okay, so all the details, I can't work them all out, but I don't mind. I have the basic principle vaguely outlined enough so that we understand what's going on, referencing various examples. All have to do with the same thing, more or less, to one degree or another. Pretty cool, huh? I think so. To be able to figure this thing out, and I never thought I would be able to. But it was a confluence of factors. It all came together between Eric Dollard and this guy's website and the patent, and watching the Ethan Hawke movie was very it's been inspirational. I've been watching it religiously, very frequently, a few times a week. I never get tired of it, you know. I really don't. I could see why. It's something in my soul that propels me forward. Whatever. So up until now, all I've dealt with is the power supply. And I hit a snag. I figured, well, gee, I don't know what to do with it now that I got it, you know. But now I can imagine what to do with it. Now that I have created, where did I put it? This rotation within this transformer coils, because everywhere else it's just electrostatics, but now I've got electromagnetic rotation inside the coils of this transformer. I got my basis for motor coils to rotate. Now all we have to do is add a mechanical vibrator. AKA along the lines of Tesla's invention. I've never studied it because I never thought I had to, but now I'm going to have to. I'm going to have to spend some time and look it up and see if there's a patent or, you know, somebody describing it, maybe a YouTube video, somebody replicated it, you know, something to help me understand it, because it's supposed to be such a simple device, a simple principle, but it's the knowledge of combining it with electromagnetics that makes the levitation possible, and that's the key. Is putting the two elements together, the two factors. And wow, it must have been a day of joy when it just came to him in his school days, when he was in college, in university, I mean. It must have really been a beautiful moment for him. And that was prior to him inventing AC current, supposedly. Oy Gewalt. Inventing his AC generator. Yeah, right. Because there were AC generators already in existence. He just came up with a better version. I think that was it. Or everything was DC. I don't know. You know, he wasn't living in a void, you know. There were other people who came before him and after him, and he was just in the middle. And he helped propel the whole thing along. Anyway, enough said. You already know all that, right? Oh boy, that was fun talking about it. Now all I have to do is write it up in my book. But I'm going to post this video first because I think it's fantastic, don't you? I think it's the most beautiful thing in the world. The video that I'm compiling is not that interesting. It's basically, it documents how I came to this point of development for this circuit, which left me at a dead end. Now what, you know? It's a UFO power supply, so what? What do you do with it? Well, this video puts the capstone on it, but I can't add it. Unfortunately, I don't think I want to add it. It's a 28-hour compilation. I don't want to start it over again. It's halfway through. Yeah, I don't think I'll add it. No, most people never watch a video for more than a few minutes anyway. They'd never get to the end, which is the juicy part. So, no, I'll post this separately. If I can find the off switch. It's time to turn this off.